Before we get going and start to learn about all of the different things that we can do with Sass to make our lives a lot easier, we're going to look at a very basic example just so we can get to grips with the command line and the different options that we have. So what we're going to do then is start to lay out our directory structure, and then we can run a command to compile a CSS file. So you can see that in my root directory here, so I've just called this Sass, I have an assets folder which is currently empty. I've got a public folder which is my public directory that the user will land on. So we're going to be in our browser heading over to public. I have an index file here, so an index.html file. It's just a basic document layout, so go ahead and create that if you'd like. And what we're going to be doing is inside of assets, we're going to be placing all of our Sass files. And that's where they're going to live. They're not going to live inside of CSS. But what we're going to be doing then is taking them assets, compiling them, and then putting the resulting CSS file into our CSS directory. And that means that you can go ahead and write all of your code and then just compile it, and you end up with one CSS file. So it's a lot more efficient. So to start with then, let's head over to the terminal and let's just run Sass H. That's going to give us different options that we can use with the command line tool. So you can see here that the usage is Sass, which we've already run. We've run the help command on here. Then we have our options, and then we have input and output. So by input, this is going to mean one file that's going to pull in all the rest of your files, and then output is going to be that CSS file. So it's Sass input and then CSS output. And then we have options that we can put in between, which we'll be looking at very briefly. So for example, we're going to be watching for changes so we don't have to run this command to compile our CSS every single time. So let's get started then by creating a very basic example inside of our assets directory. And inside of assets, things like JavaScript would live as well and anything like that. So we're going to be creating a new folder in here, specifically calling it styles. So this is where all of our styles are going to live. So let's create a new file in here then, and I'm going to call this app.scss. So notice the file extension, that's pretty important. We're going to save this, and we can write anything we want in here. So let's start with a really basic example. Let's create a paragraph element on our page, and let's just put some text in there. It can be anything at all. So heading over to here, we obviously have no style sheet currently linked into this index.html file. So let's go ahead and link one in. It doesn't exist at the moment. It's going to be in CSS. So let's say CSS app.css. That will never need to change. You'll only have one CSS file within your project. So we obviously don't have any styles on here at the moment, but what we're going to be doing now is writing a little bit of code in here and going ahead and just compiling it just to test things out. So let's write some very basic code in here, just as we would within CSS. Now it's important to know at this point I'm using the SCSS syntax rather than the Sass syntax. And if you head over to the Sass website, you can flick under the guide between these two just to see what they look like. Now I personally prefer SCSS syntax over Sass syntax, just because I feel it is a little bit more natural to write if you're coming from CSS. It just makes it a little bit easier. And it doesn't make any difference to the way that your code is output. You can just see we're omitting the end semicolons, and we are getting rid of the brackets as well and just indenting here instead. So just a note there that I'm using the SCSS syntax. So for the paragraph then, let's go ahead and change the color to red. So we'll just do that as an example. Obviously when we refresh we don't see any change because our app.scss isn't loaded into our browser, and even if it were, it wouldn't work because it wouldn't be able to read this. I mean, it probably would be able to read this, but when we get into more advanced Sass, it wouldn't. So what we need to do is compile this file and place it into our CSS directory. So let's head back over to our terminal and just clear this. So remember, we have Sass, then we have the options that can go here. We're not going to be doing that just yet. We're going to be passing in our input file and then telling Sass where to put our output file. So we're in the root directory, so we know that our input file is within assets, styles, and it's app.scss. And our output file is going to be CSS or rather public CSS app.css. So when I hit enter there, that's going to go ahead and compile that file. So you'll have noticed that a couple of things have happened here. We've had a few files or directories being created. We have this Sass cache, which you can pretty much safely ignore, and you're not going to want to upload this to your web server either. And if you're using version control, make sure that's ignored. We have our app.css file, which has been created as expected. So we just see the CSS written in here as normal. Obviously, there's no difference from this to this because we're just writing plain CSS. But obviously, when we get more advanced and we use things like mix-ins and placeholders and variables, you'll see this just transform into a normal CSS file. So now, obviously, on our page here, we can see that we have red text as expected. So that is how we go ahead and compile our Sass files to CSS. There are a couple of other options that we can use. We can watch for changes as well. So we'll take a very brief look at this, and we'll be using that as we go through the series, so we don't have to keep running this command, because it would be pretty annoying to have to keep running this every time you wanted to compile. So if we go to Sass H again, just so we can grab this, if we go up here, you can see that we have this watch option. So this watches files or directories for changes, etc., etc. The location of generated CSS can be set using a colon. So what we have to do is we have to pass the watch option in, but then we have to separate these with a colon. So we've got our input and our output, which is pretty straightforward. So all we want to do then is say Sass watch. We do exactly the same thing. So remember, we're going into assets styles app.scss. So assets styles app.scss. And we have a colon there instead of a space, and we have no spacing at all. And we want to place that compiled file into public CSS app.css. Hit enter. And now Sass is watching for changes. So this will just sort of hang here until any changes are made. So for example, let's close off our app.css file. Let's say we wanted to change this paragraph to blue. Now what's happened here is I've already saved this within my text editor, and Sass, well, I saved it 3 times, but Sass has detected a change. So a change detected to this file. It's gone ahead and written that app.css and that map file in there, and obviously when we refresh we see them styles updated. So this is what we're going to be using when we go through the rest of the series and learn everything we need to know about Sass and build up that page that we saw in the first part. So this is a really nice thing to have because we don't have to worry about recompiling. And that is pretty much it on the basics of how to use the command line tool. We're now going to go ahead and start to build up that page that we saw earlier and go ahead and learn everything we need to know about Sass.